Hey, what's up? Liron here, and in this lesson I'm going to teach you how to make the most out of the initial first wash in watercolor painting, sometimes called an underpainting. And I'm going to do something that's fairly unusual. If you've been following me for a while, you know that. I'm going to start wet in wet, fully. I'm going to wet the whole thing, which I rarely do, and start dabbing paint into it, and that's going to be the first wash, okay? So with that being said, let's get started. So we'll get started, and as you may have noticed, a lot of my recent videos have been kind of a different vibe that is more like practice with me. So I'm using a bit of my water sprayer just to dampen the paper. And as I mentioned, we're gonna do something that is also very foreign to me, and that is pre-wetting the paper. There are plenty of ways of doing that. I'm gonna go with the simplest one, which is actually just to grab water and pre-wet the paper with it. Some people go at it completely different ways. You know, using a sponge or all sorts of different methods. I like the combination of just the brush and the spray gun, and this will allow the paint to better flow. Now this is a 300-gram paper, Arche, because I ran out of Saunders water for it. Unfortunately, they don't import it here anymore. I will find a way probably to solve it. But in any case, it is a pretty thirsty paper, so it's okay to go over it a couple of times. As you see here, I am going over it a couple of times. This is a rather gloomy scene where it comes to the sky, but the rest is fairly light and bright and nice. So I think this is wet enough. Let's start injecting some color into it. So starting with the sky, and again, they're pretty muted, so I'm going to use fairly muted colors here, and just start very gently, okay? And we'll see how we can make the most out of this underpainting step. Okay, now my paper isn't at a too strong of an angle at the moment. I don't want the paint to move too much, okay? I want it to have some control. So you see with the water, if you go wet and wet, you can't make too many mistakes. In my experience, really, it's all gonna blend nicely and lead to a nice result. What you can do is also lift. I'm gonna show you in just a moment. And to keep things fresh, I'm just occasionally gonna spray it a bit. But if we put a couple of clouds there and we play around with the saturation of the blue a bit so that it will look like this is truly a sky with some of its blue coming through, that's a good way of doing that. Just a bit of blue and then the rest is fairly muted. And I do have touches of fairly light paint, so I don't even know if I'm gonna lift that much. I do see a couple of very strong shapes of clouds, so let me try. Let's go for it, because we're learning here, so I think experimentation will be a smart thing to improve. So I'm lifting back some clouds, and if you know me, you know I barely work this way, so it's fairly different from what I usually do. Now I'm gonna switch to a bit of a warmer mix and just start applying it to where the rooftops are, okay? And actually, I could apply it to the entire structure, to be honest, because the structures are pretty warm. So let's go for that. I'm just gonna put in all of this warmth into the structures. The one thing you do lose when you work that way with pre-wetting the paper is just, you know, the control, because obviously we're working on a wet surface, which makes the paint move a lot more. So don't expect to get too much control at this stage. This is more about connectivity, looseness, a lot of connections, and setting up the temperature, the initial kind of temperature you want the painting to have, I would say. So this is all pretty warm. Now, when we get to these mountains in the background, I do want to mute this entire thing up, get a bit of a perhaps yellowish gray, but more towards the gray, I would say, and apply that as well, see? And these beautiful edges that are soft will provide a nice backdrop for the next washes, and I think ideally I'd like to not have to go over them again. So I'm going to try and go fairly strong for now. It seems strong, it's not really that strong, so that I don't have to go over them again later. Like so. and move towards the bridge here. And I think we're good. Now towards the bottom, I'm going to start indicating some more yellows and greens and some happy colors. The bridge itself, I'd like to add some redness to it, so kind of similar to this structure. So something like this. And again, you just let the color move, let it do what it does. That's why we use this method, because we can in watercolor. This is a very valid way of doing the initial wash, especially if you're scared to do it like I do, top to bottom, using you know, fairly strong paint to begin with. I know that's kind of my go-to, and not everyone connects with that. Now, with this method, we can really make the most out of the wash, because notice here, I'm starting to put a bit of yellow, and then I can switch up, grab some burnt sienna, put that in some places, you see, and I can take my time and inject paint into different areas of the painting, and it will all mix and blend together very nicely. You can't go too dark because it's, again, wet and wet. So even if you try, it won't darken too much. I actually really love the brown touches here on the ground. I'm gonna add a bit of red to it, like this. And try, when you do that, to preserve still some color individuality. So now if I have these beautiful yellows here, I want to preserve them, okay? I want to make sure I have them for the next stages. So I'm not gonna go over them with a blue or something, or with a red too much, because I want them to be visible. Now, in theory, you could do a painting fully wet and wet. You could finish the painting completely wet and wet. What you do is you wait for it to dry a bit so you have more control, then you continue applying more and more paint. So it is possible. I don't know if it's something I'd like to do right now, because we'll just stand here and wait for this to dry. So I think we're gonna let it dry normally, and then come back and continue. But you see this started to blend a bit, and now the area is a little drier, so I can go back with some of my muted color here, fairly thick, you have to, and just strengthen some part of it. That's not thick enough, my bad. You really need it to have few, like little water. That's better. And then just strengthen perhaps some part of the edge, you see? Like that. Or the entire thing, you know, because we're already here. Just to make sure that it is visible. I don't mind some of the edges blurring, in fact, that'll be preferable, but I do want some of them to be clear, and I'd rather, as I mentioned, not touch this in the next washes. You can always pre-wet and then come back, but if we're already here, why would we do that? Let's try and get this done at this stage, okay? So yeah, I think we're gonna let it dry now. We could wait, see how it develops, but for the constraints of this video, I don't want to go there. So we'll let it dry, but know that if you do this yourself, you can wait, look at the paint, look at the sheen in the light, figure out how wet it is, and gradually add more and more paint to it. I'm not going to do it this time. So here's where it gets really cool. We've established the major areas of color, temperature, and now this is fully dry. It looks a little more muted, and you've probably noticed this in your own paintings, hopefully. That's what happens when the paint dries, is just because there is less water, it's less glowy, which is fine. It's a natural part of it. When you see the end result, you won't even think about these things. So in any case, the next step is to look at this entire thing and define the main shapes. We want to make it easier for the viewer to know what to focus on, what's interesting, what's not interesting. So when I look at this entire thing, there are a couple of very clear large shapes. One of them is the castle itself. Okay, that's very clearly a major shape, an important one, and a fairly dark one too. Then we have this mountain ridge in the background that hopefully we won't even have to touch. Okay, I like the way it looks. I think it looks nice, and it will look nice with the variety of edges. And then we have a couple of details in the foreground that are some smaller, some larger, but that's, I would say, the third main shape. You can look at it as one shape. So now we're free to start working on the main shapes, and the first one we're going to work at is the castle. It's just the most prominent one. So what I'm doing is I'm mixing a warm color. I don't really care exactly what it is. In fact, let me switch to a smaller brush. I don't care what the color is. I just want it to be warm, and it's fairly muted here as well. what will happen is a muted castle will make this part with the greens and yellows and browns lighter and brighter. So I don't mind going a little bit muted and dark red or dark warm on the castle itself. Now, if you see, these chimneys here are all in the shadow. I'm just going to start rendering the shapes. I'm going to zoom in. I have the photo in front of me on my computer. And I'm just going to start rendering the shapes. Now, to be fair, the rooftops should be much darker. I don't think I'm going to get them darker. I think I'll try and have this one layer, then a layer of shadow, and we're done. Okay? So I'm going to try not to drag this layer into too much darkness. That's the point here. Because I lightened up this wash, so might as well lighten the shadows wash. So this is one. And then there's another one, a little more at the front. And this one kind of jumps outside of the rooftop and then goes back inside. It casts a shadow, okay, and hopefully you can see the nice detail. It casts a shadow to the right, a rather thick shadow actually, like this. Straighten that line, and it connects to another shadow that's on the steps part of the rooftop, a very nice and interesting, I think, architectural structure to it, so something like that. And moving on and continuing, I'm going to add a bit more yellow just to keep this varied, and have this line up top of the really demonstrating the shape of the shingles, I would say, all the way up to here. This part is also in the shadow, so that's another chimney. Let's get some shape atop of it. So we have this. Now here we have this rounded tower. Let's get its right side in. And then work our way around the fence. Now I'm still trying to keep this fairly... what's the word I'm looking for? Fairly simplified and not going into too many details. So I will try to merge a lot of the shapes you currently see, okay? So now as I move into this wall, I'm just going to connect it to this turret. I think that's a turret on the side of the wall here. It goes diagonally in. Now here's where it gets important. You just want to get the shape of these dormers on the wall. Sorry if it takes me sometimes time to remember words. It's just hard to do while I paint, so I'm trying my best. So that's dormer 1, dormer 2, then connect to the bottom part under this tower. And I'm going to switch to a larger brush now. And I could go with a bit more blue and darkness on the wall itself. So let's add, we have some sepia here, that'll work nicely, and a bit of this cool blue. These two together. And just start moving. Now what you want to do is just make sure you don't lose the fluidity of the wash. Try and imagine the whole shape, the entire shape as a whole. Okay, and figure out what do I need to paint. And if you can do that, which isn't easy, you'll be able to preserve and maintain an even wash. Okay, now I'm going to leave a bit of a highlight between this wall at the back and the crenellations on the wall. Just a bit of it, okay? I'm running the risk of going into too many details here, quite honestly, and I don't want to go there. So let's go with a bit of yellow here for the bottom part of this tower, just to have it a bit differentiated from the rest. And notice how the initial wash really helped us define most of the important sections of this this entire castle, or whatever that is. Here's the gap I was talking about between the crenellations. Just a bit of a gap here to show it's different, it's multi-layered. But yeah, the initial wash really helped us establish a lot of things here that now, thanks to them, we don't need to do too much. You see, I'm just kind of working my way around the different details. Now, I'm going to try to connect it quickly to the structure on the left, to this bottom of the rooftop. And now look at where these shapes end. They end somewhere around here near the trees and foliage. So we need to get that connection point in, and I have to work a little fast so that I don't lose the evenness of the wash, you see? So connect this to the left edge, and stop where the foliage begins, because the foliage gets significantly lighter. Try to keep it varied and interesting, so don't go with a, too flat of a shape or too predictable of a shape. That's something you learn to do with time. It's not always easy. But with time you learn to define natural organic shapes in a more efficient way. Now here I'm going to lose some of the freshness of the wash, unfortunately. That cannot be helped. It worked a little slowly, but that's fine. I'm going to darken it just a bit around the bottom, like so. Once we add some details and windows, it's going to be fine, so don't worry about losing some of the evenness. This is the wall behind, and it does have those nice crenellations here, like that. And then there's a very small line through here that I might as well get, and a very small highlight in between the wall in the background and the wall in the front, like that. Let's build this shape up here like this. And there is a wall here that shows through some of the foliage. So let's get that. It's going to be a continuation of this bridge. And we can work our way towards the bridge. Now notice how there are a bit of highlights on the rocks forming the bridge. So you see we're going to leave this gap, and that's really going to help us. Now for the bridge itself, let me move the reference photo. I'm going to warm it up a bit, and let me also move this just a bit. Some yellow. I want this to be a bit of a shinier, warmer wall to balance out this section. And I know I haven't gotten to this rooftop. We'll get to it in a few moments. So that's too big of a difference. Let's go back to some of the original colors. Some of the sepia here. And we're leaving this gap, you see, and working our way around the foliage. Like so. There's grass here. And all of this connects to the bridge. Now notice how on the bridge there are a couple of highlights we want to preserve. Try getting them in without going into too many details, because we are keeping this fairly loose. So here we go, that's the first highlight. And moving onwards, let's blue it up a bit, like so. Let's add a bit of water. This is a little too dark. Started getting carried away. The reason I wanted to not to be too dark is that we're going to have a darker section underneath it in just a moment, and I want that to be seen as well. So something like this is much better. It's also close to the edge of the painting, so I don't really need to go that dark. Now here, I'm going to add a bit of that darkness under the arches. So can you see how this section gets a little darker? I'm going to do that now while they're connected, okay? Because that'll provide for a clearer, nicer, I think, impression. So that's one. Quite a bit of shadow on the base here. And that's going to be 2. Like so. Cast shadow a bit under that. That's fine. I exaggerated it a bit, but it looks good, so I don't mind that. And we kind of got that section done. I think it looks beautiful. And there are people on the bridge, but I'm going to ignore it and treat it as kind of an old medieval structure that, maybe at the moment people aren't walking on the bridge. Now, so I don't want it to just look like a tourist attraction, basically. Now you see how the highlight here is visible with the help of the foliage above the bridge? So let's get some of that. I'm using some sap green together with this warm pyrrole scarlet red to create some foliage around here that will help bring out the shape of the highlights on top of the bridge, okay? And you can alternate between some more sap green, some more red, just to get some interest going. But you see how it made the top of the bridge shine a bit? Now, let's take a step back. And before we do that, let's go back to this section here. Get this rooftop done, and then we'll take a step back, zoom out, and figure out what to do with the foreground. So here we have, and I'm going to move back on my reference as well, we have these couple of chimneys, same thing, just a smaller rooftop, and this like that, and this casts shadow, and we can be a little more quick, loose, and light-hearted with this one. mainly because we have the main rooftop that we put in a lot of care. So to balance it out, you can go a little quicker on this one. You don't have to, but you can. And then the top shadow here, where the roof ends, and then this chimney connects to this wall. Now let's take a step back, zoom out. So this is a good stage to kind of take a step back, squint our eyes, and figure out what we want to make of this. If you notice, the floor here is very light. The green can look misleadingly dark, but it's actually fairly light. What I see here is some indication of shadows on the trees, and then a bit of dirt or you know, sand here, brown kind of earth. And that's pretty much it. So let's get started with indicating these. Now, I want to keep the focus on the castle itself, so we're not going to go too dark. Okay, I'm going to have to pay close attention that we don't go too dark on the shadows underneath these. So let's start just by indicating some. So we have some shadows here, see? And try and have the shadows not only just all dry brushed, but also have some parts of them fairly connected. By making these connections, it's just going to make it look good. And it will make it easier for the viewer to figure out what they're looking at. If all you do is dry brush, that can lead to some problems, in my opinion. So just mixing whatever comes to mind here. I have a bunch of, you can see the mixing, my apologies because I'm zoomed in, but just using a bit of blue, a bit of burnt sienna. Here we have another kind of a bush or a large bush a bit to the right. The base here, let's make it like a more of a rounded base, so something like that. And with that, believe it or not, these shadows are done. We have a shadow under the rocks near the bottom here that I want to get, so this is going to be fairly simple actually. I'm just going to get it with some dry and wet brush combinations like this. It actually has a bit of a purple feel to it. I'm going to just inject some pure red and yellow to make this a little more interesting, really. That's the only reason. A bit of a shadow here. We have a bit of a bush here. And now we get to the section where there is this earthy color. So I'm going to get as pure of burnt sienna as I can. Not too dark. You want to keep this fairly light and just get that earthy feeling. So we go like this. See how some of the earth is visible next to the rocks and the foliage. And the foreground is something that used to be a major point of frustration for me. I couldn't understand how to handle it, and these days I'm having a bit of an easier time because as soon as you get more comfortable with the medium, it kind of starts telling you what it needs, and getting these details in is much easier. Once you're just comfortable, you know, you just have to believe, like all of the details I'm putting in right now, they don't necessarily represent accurately what I see, but I just have a belief that they will work. So that's a major part of it. And if you can just paint, it actually relates to one of my recent podcast episodes. If you can just paint a lot, spend a lot of time doing rather than thinking or overthinking and planning, you'll be much better off because you can just practice a lot and gain the experience required to learn how to render these things in a believable way and in a fun way. As opposed to if you plan too much or think too much, you end up kind of discouraging yourself almost. So a lot of this, why it looks good or fitting, or maybe it doesn't look good to you, I don't know, but for me, a lot of why I was able to get it to work is just the pure confidence. So that's it. This is done. I think the foreground has enough details. Let's zoom back in on the castle. And by now it's dry enough so we can just go ahead and start putting in the details I wanted. So a lot of thick paint here. I'm just mixing it to the side, and we'll just start putting in some touches, okay? So some touches for the rooftop, for the windows, for all sorts of details. Like so. I'm starting from somewhere around the top and then making my way downwards. But you can work at it whichever order you prefer, because remember that this is fairly dry, so you don't have to worry about it, you know, drying on you. It's just like drawing, which is why I love this step. It's just like you're drawing, really, with a pencil. Just you do it with the paint. So you really want to treat this step as sort of enhancing the focal point. Wherever we'll add more details, that's where the viewer's eye will naturally gravitate towards. And having these details allows the viewer's eye to stop and look at them. So this is what we're trying to do here. You will develop a sense for how to do this, where to place the details. Obviously, a lot of it depends on what you did during the pencil stages, where you drew the different lines, but also this is a sense that develops with time. And there are millions of ways of approaching this. Some people will go very heavy on the details at this stage, while others will keep them very few. So yeah, that's just a matter of approach. For me, I like to put in, at the very least, the windows I see, all sorts of architectural details that will help enhance the feeling of the structure. You know, I love architecture. It's one of my favorite things to paint, you know, different buildings, even from different time periods. Now I fall in love even more with the medieval time periods, castles and different structures. So yeah, that's nice. You see how it just starts to take its shape. On top of the crenellations, there are these nice little shadows. Here on some of the chimneys. I'm not even thinking at this point, and I'm not even always looking at the reference photo. I'm just getting the details in where I think they will look good. So it's kind of a combination of what I think will look good and what the reference, I want to say dictates, but very loosely dictates, because we've established it doesn't dictate that much. Now, one thing that's fairly major I missed, first off, there is this, you know, the gate. But then also there is this shadow on the tower that I completely ignored. So let's get that in now, this. And then blend it a bit, like so. Get a few more details on the wall to the right, and also on the bridge. So the wall, there's actually a window here within the shadow, the light, sorry. There are a couple of different details here. And then as we get to the bridge itself, also a few details. So we have this kind of a thing here alongside the sides of the bridge. This shadow is great. We don't need to change that. Actually, I wouldn't change too much, you know. I'm gonna leave it, I think, like that. Now here, if there's something you want to bring out more, or, you know, just strengthen, you can go for it. It's not really necessary. I feel like we've built, or we've struck a good balance. You can add a bit of small shadows here and there, alternate the color, add more green to them. But whatever you do, try not to get to a point where it feels very fragmented, and very, like, a lot of, like, you know, these... Some watercolors look a bit like oils trying to indicate every blade of grass. You don't necessarily want to go this fragmented. So if you do a lot of these dry brush marks, you can then take a bit of water and do a mark that's fairly connected, you see? And this will strike a nice little balance in your work. Okay, so this is done. What I'm going to do is just remove the tape, and then we'll wrap it up face to face. So the painting is fully dry. I also signed it, and I find it with these landscape types of paintings, rural kind of scenes, removing the tape does have a major effect at times. So we'll get to see the results of that. And actually the colors never really come to look similar in the camera. Let me hold it up close. You see there's a bit more saturation to it than it seems, but hopefully you get to see this. And I usually edit the video to make sure that it is as true to the real colors as possible. But in any case, I hope you enjoyed this one. Now let's wrap it up face to face. So this is it, final result. I hope you enjoyed seeing the process and seeing me do something a little different. This time doing the wet and wet for the first wash. Again, something I rarely do. I actually like the idea of applying paint from top to bottom as an initial wash, not pre-wetting the whole thing, but that shows you that it does work. It is a possible way of doing things, and to not listen to me necessarily, but try it out for yourself, see what you enjoy the most, see what works best for you. And again, as you've noticed, a lot of my recent videos are kind of try it with me or practice with me, because I feel like I have a lot to learn at this point. It's like my mind's been open to just how much I don't yet know. The more I learn, again, the more I realize how much I still have to improve. So I'm trying to do these videos in an authentic way, and not from the necessarily context of here is me teaching you everything and that's how to do it, but more like learn how to do it with me and learn from my own lessons, my own mistakes, my own successes. Hope you enjoyed this one. Don't forget to drop a like and leave a comment down below. Let me know your thoughts, and also subscribe if you still haven't. I have tons of videos like this one, tons of painting processes from start to finish, narrated, the whole thing. I want to thank you so much, and I will see you again in the next vid real soon.